Confidence is not what you think. What if the biggest thing standing between you and the life you want isn't your intelligence, your money, your appearance, or your circumstances? What if it's the way you see yourself? Think about how many times you've wanted to speak up, but stayed quiet. How many times you've had an opinion, but kept it to yourself because you were afraid of being judged. How many opportunities you've watched pass by because you weren't sure you were ready. How many times you've said yes when you desperately wanted to say no. And how many times you've stood in front of a mirror, telling yourself to be confident, while a quieter voice inside your head whispered, "What if I'm not good enough?" That voice has controlled more lives than most people will ever admit. It has stopped people from starting businesses. It has kept talented people in jobs they hate. It has prevented people from approaching the person they wanted to meet. It has made people tolerate disrespect. It has turned intelligent people into chronic overthinkers. And perhaps most dangerously, it has convinced ordinary people to spend their entire lives waiting to become someone they believe is worthy of confidence. But here's the truth. Confidence isn't something you're born with. And it isn't something that suddenly appears when you become richer, more attractive, more successful, or more powerful. Confidence is built, piece by piece, decision by decision, challenge by challenge. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you build it. Every time you do something you're afraid to do, you build it. Every time you survive rejection, embarrassment, failure, or criticism and keep moving forward, you build it. And eventually, something changes. You stop asking, "What will they think of me?" You start asking, "What do I think of myself?" You stop waiting for permission. You stop explaining every decision. You stop shrinking yourself to make other people comfortable. You stop treating fear as a warning that you should turn around. And you develop something far more powerful than ordinary confidence. You develop self-trust. That is what I mean by being dangerously confident. Not arrogant. Not aggressive. Not loud. Not someone who walks into every room trying to prove that they're better than everyone else. Quite the opposite. A dangerously confident person doesn't need to prove anything. They can walk into a room without demanding attention. They can hear criticism without falling apart. They can hear no without questioning their worth. They can admit when they're wrong without feeling humiliated. They can walk away from people who disrespect them. They can make difficult decisions without needing everyone to agree. And when life knocks them down, they don't ask, "Why me? This? What now?" That is the kind of confidence we're going to build in this audiobook. Over the next 40 minutes, you're going to learn how to stop chasing approval, how to become comfortable with discomfort, how to speak with authority, how to set boundaries without guilt, how to handle rejection, and most importantly, how to become someone you can trust completely. Because when you trust yourself, something extraordinary happens. You become harder to intimidate, harder to manipulate, harder to discourage, and much harder to stop. So forget everything you've been taught about confidence. You don't need to become the loudest person in the room. You don't need to pretend you're fearless. You don't need to convince yourself that you're better than everyone else. You need to become so secure in who you are and where you're going that other people's opinions no longer control your behavior. And that transformation begins with one decision. You stop waiting for permission to become the person you were capable of becoming all along. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Stop asking for permission. There is a subtle habit that keeps millions of people from becoming the person they want to be. They wait for permission. Not necessarily because someone is standing in front of them and telling them no. Sometimes the permission they're waiting for doesn't even exist. They're waiting for someone to tell them, "You're ready. You're good enough. You can do this. It's okay to change. It's okay to want more. It's okay to disappoint people. It's okay to be different." And while they're waiting, life keeps moving. Years pass. Opportunities disappear. Dreams become distant. And eventually, they convince themselves that they simply weren't meant for the things they once wanted. But often, the problem wasn't a lack of ability. It was a lack of permission they never actually needed. Think about how often you have done this. You have an idea, but before acting on it, you imagine what other people might say. You want to start something new, but you tell yourself you need more knowledge first. You want to leave a situation that makes you unhappy, but you're worried about disappointing someone. You want to speak your mind, but you wonder whether people will agree with you. You want to dress differently, think differently, build differently, live differently. But somewhere inside your mind is a question. What will people think? That question sounds harmless. It isn't. Because when you allow other people's opinions to determine your decisions, you gradually hand them control over your life. And the frightening part is that they may never even realize they have that control. You don't need someone to physically stop you. All they need to do is make you afraid of their reaction. That fear can be enough. You become your own prison guard. You censor yourself. You hesitate. You overthink. You seek approval. You ask everyone what they think. And eventually, you stop asking yourself what you think. That is where confidence begins to disappear. Because confidence requires something most people don't understand. The willingness to make decisions for yourself. Not recklessly. Not selfishly. Not without considering consequences. But independently. There is a difference between listening to advice and needing permission. A confident person can listen. They can consider criticism. They can change their mind. They can admit they were wrong. But ultimately they can say, I have heard what you think. Now I will decide what I believe is right for me. That sentence represents a tremendous amount of personal power. Because the moment you realize that you are responsible for your decisions, you also realize something else. You are responsible for your life. And that can be uncomfortable. It is much easier to blame circumstances. To blame your parents. To blame your partner. To blame your boss. To blame the economy. To blame your past. To blame the people who didn't support you. Sometimes those circumstances genuinely make life harder. But there comes a point where you have to ask yourself, what am I going to do with the circumstances I have? That is where personal power begins. You may not control what happened to you, but you can begin controlling what happens next. And dangerously confident people understand this. They don't wait until every condition is perfect. They don't wait until everyone believes in them. They don't wait until fear disappears. They move. They make the decision. They take responsibility. And they adjust along the way. Because confidence isn't certainty that everything will work. Confidence is trust that you will figure out what to do if it doesn't. Think about that for a moment. You don't need to know exactly how everything will turn out. You only need enough confidence to take the next step. This is why waiting to feel confident is such a trap. People think confidence comes first and action comes second. In reality, the relationship often works in reverse. You act. You survive. You learn. You improve. And then your brain begins collecting evidence that you are capable. That evidence becomes confidence. So if you've been waiting to feel ready, understand this. You may never feel ready. The person who starts the business doesn't necessarily feel ready. The person who gives the speech doesn't necessarily feel ready. The person who leaves an unhealthy environment doesn't necessarily feel ready. The person who applies for the opportunity doesn't necessarily feel ready. They simply decide that being uncomfortable is not a good enough reason to remain where they are. And this is where you need to be careful. Because the world will often reward people for staying predictable. People become comfortable with the version of you they already know. If you've always been agreeable, the moment you start setting boundaries, someone may accuse you of changing. If you've always been quiet, the moment you speak confidently, someone may call you arrogant. If you've always played small, the moment you become ambitious, someone may tell you that you've changed. And they're right. You have changed. That's the point. You are not supposed to spend your entire life being the person everyone else became comfortable with. Growth often makes people uncomfortable because it changes the relationship they have with you. And you have to learn to tolerate that discomfort. This doesn't mean you should ignore everyone. It means you need to become selective about whose opinions deserve influence. Ask yourself, Does this person understand where I'm trying to go? Do they have experience in the area they're criticizing? Do they genuinely want what's best for me? Do I respect their judgment? If the answer is no, you don't have to turn their opinion into your identity. Someone can dislike your decision without proving that your decision is wrong. Someone can misunderstand you without meaning that you have failed to explain yourself. Someone can reject you without proving that you're unworthy. And someone can doubt you without predicting your future. This is one of the most important distinctions you can learn. An opinion is not a verdict. Let that sink in. An opinion is not a verdict. Someone saying you're not capable doesn't make you incapable. Someone saying you'll fail doesn't make failure inevitable. Someone saying you're not good enough doesn't determine your value. You decide what meaning you give their words. And once you understand this, you become much harder to control. Now, there is another form of permission that may be even more dangerous. The permission you give yourself to remain comfortable. You tell yourself, I'll start next month. I'll do it when I have more money. I'll do it when I'm more confident. I'll do it when I know exactly what I'm doing. I'll do it when the timing is right. And sometimes those statements are reasonable. But sometimes there's simply fear wearing the clothes of logic. You don't actually need more time. You need a decision. You don't need another 100 motivational videos. You need to take the first uncomfortable step. You don't need everyone to believe in you. You need to stop abandoning yourself every time someone doesn't. So here's your first challenge. Think of one thing you've been postponing because you're waiting for permission. Maybe it's starting a project, applying for a job, launching a business, speaking to someone, setting a boundary, learning a skill, leaving something behind, or simply becoming more visible. Now ask yourself, if nobody could judge me, what would I do? Don't answer quickly. Think about it, because your answer may reveal something important. It may show you that the life you want isn't as far away as you thought. Perhaps you've simply been afraid to claim it. And claiming your life doesn't require a dramatic transformation overnight. Start small. Make one decision without asking everyone else what they think. Keep one promise to yourself. Say no once when you genuinely mean no. Speak your opinion without immediately apologizing for having one. Take one action you've been postponing. Then notice what happens. You may feel uncomfortable. You may feel nervous. You may wonder whether you made the right decision. That's normal. Confidence isn't the absence of doubt. It is the ability to move forward while doubt is still present. Every time you act despite uncertainty, you teach yourself something. I can handle this. Every time you survive someone else's disapproval, you learn. I don't need everyone to approve of me. Every time you make a difficult decision and take responsibility for the outcome, you learn. I can trust myself. And that is the foundation we're going to build throughout this audiobook. Because the goal isn't to make you dependent on confidence. The goal is to make you dependent on yourself. To know that when life becomes uncertain, you don't immediately collapse. You think. You decide. You act. You learn. You adapt. You continue. That is real confidence. So from this moment forward, stop asking, am I allowed? Start asking, is this right for the person I am becoming? Stop asking, will everyone approve? Start asking, do I respect the decision I'm making? Stop asking, what if they judge me? Start asking, what will it cost me if I keep living for their approval? Because every time you choose your authentic direction over someone else's expectations, you become a little more free. And every time you choose freedom over approval, you become a little more confident. Remember, you don't need permission to take yourself seriously. You don't need permission to grow. You don't need permission to become more disciplined. You don't need permission to set boundaries. You don't need permission to pursue something meaningful. And you certainly don't need permission to become the person you know you are capable of becoming. The moment you stop waiting for permission is the moment you begin taking ownership of your life. And once you take ownership of your life, the next battle begins. Because even after you stop asking for permission, there is still one powerful force that can keep you trapped: the fear of being judged. And in the next chapter, we're going to confront it directly. Chapter 2: Kill the fear of being judged. Imagine walking into a room and realizing something. Nobody is thinking about you nearly as much as you think they are. The way you're standing, the way you're dressed, the words you just said, the mistake you made 5 minutes ago, the way you laughed, the way you looked, the question you asked. You may be replaying these things inside your head, wondering whether people noticed. But most of them didn't. And even if they did, they probably forgot about them shortly afterward. Yet somehow, the fear of judgment can still control your behavior. It can stop you from speaking, stop you from asking, stop you from creating, stop you from taking risks, stop you from becoming visible. And if you allow it to control you for long enough, you can end up living a life designed around avoiding other people's opinions rather than pursuing your own potential. That is not freedom. That is psychological captivity. The fear of judgment is powerful because humans are social creatures. For thousands of years, being rejected by the group could have serious consequences. So your brain naturally pays attention to how others perceive you. The problem is that modern life has amplified this instinct. Now, instead of worrying about the opinions of a small group of people around you, you can potentially be judged by hundreds, thousands, or even millions of people. Social media has made this worse. You post something. Someone doesn't like it. Someone leaves a negative comment. Someone laughs at you. Someone disagrees. And suddenly, your brain interprets that tiny moment of rejection as if your entire identity is under attack. So you delete the post. You stay silent. You stop trying. You decide, maybe this isn't for me. But here's the question you need to ask. Who exactly are you trying to impress? Because if the answer is everyone, you have already created an impossible mission. You cannot make everyone like you. You cannot make everyone understand you. You cannot make everyone agree with you. And you cannot build a meaningful life while constantly adjusting yourself to satisfy an audience that never stops changing. Someone will think you're too ambitious. Someone else will think you're not ambitious enough. Someone will think you're too quiet. Someone else will think you're too loud. Someone will think you're too serious. Someone else will think you're not serious enough. You could spend your entire life trying to find the perfect version of yourself that nobody can criticize. It doesn't exist. So stop trying to become universally acceptable. Instead, become deeply comfortable with being yourself. That doesn't mean refusing to improve. It means understanding the difference between self-improvement and self-rejection. Self-improvement says, there are things I can become better at. Self-rejection says, there is something fundamentally wrong with me. The first creates growth. The second creates insecurity. And insecure people often become obsessed with managing impressions. They carefully choose every word. They constantly monitor people's reactions. They apologize when they haven't done anything wrong. They explain themselves excessively. They change their opinions depending on who they're speaking to. They laugh when they don't find something funny. They agree when they actually disagree. They say yes when they desperately want to say no. Eventually, they become so focused on being accepted that they lose touch with what they actually believe. And that is one of the most expensive prices you can pay for approval. You lose yourself. Now, imagine the opposite. Imagine being able to walk into a room and think, I don't need everyone here to like me. Imagine being able to express an opinion without mentally preparing for every possible disagreement. Imagine being able to hear criticism without immediately becoming defensive. Imagine being able to make a mistake in public and simply think, that didn't go well. I'll do better next time. That is confidence, not perfection. Resilience. The confident person isn't someone who never experiences embarrassment. It's someone who doesn't allow embarrassment to define them. And this is a crucial distinction. You don't need to eliminate embarrassment. You need to become capable of surviving it. You don't need to eliminate rejection. You need to become capable of surviving it. You don't need to eliminate criticism. You need to become capable of evaluating it without being destroyed by it. This is how you become emotionally stronger. You stop treating every uncomfortable experience as a threat to your identity. You begin seeing it as information. Someone criticizes your work? Is there something useful here? If yes, learn from it. If no, move on. Someone doesn't like you? Is there something I need to correct? If yes, correct it. If no, accept that not everyone will be compatible with you. Someone rejects your offer? What can I learn from this? Then keep moving. This simple mindset can completely change your relationship with rejection, because rejection stops being a statement about your worth. It becomes a result, and results can be studied. Results can be improved. Results can be changed. Your identity doesn't have to collapse every time something doesn't go your way. Now, there is something else you need to understand. Sometimes people will judge you because you're actually doing something different. Think about that. When you begin changing your life, you may make people uncomfortable. Not necessarily because you're doing something wrong, but because your growth challenges their expectations of you. If they've known you as the quiet person and you suddenly become outspoken, they may say you've changed. If they've known you as the person who always says yes, and you start setting boundaries, they may call you selfish. If they've known you as someone who never takes risks, and you suddenly pursue something ambitious, they may tell you to be realistic. You need to understand something. Their discomfort is not automatically your responsibility. You can respect people without allowing them to dictate your identity. You can love people without living according to their expectations. You can listen to advice without surrendering your judgment. And you can disappoint someone without becoming a bad person. That last one is especially important. Many people confuse disappointing someone with doing something wrong. They're not the same. Sometimes you will disappoint people simply because you choose yourself. You won't attend the event. You won't lend the money. You won't accept the opportunity. You won't continue the relationship. You won't take the job. You won't agree with their opinion. And they may not like it. That's okay. Their emotional reaction doesn't automatically mean your boundary was wrong. You have to learn how to tolerate the temporary discomfort of someone else's disappointment. Because if you can't tolerate that discomfort, you will repeatedly betray yourself to prevent other people from experiencing it. And that is how people-pleasing becomes a lifestyle. You sacrifice your peace to protect everyone else's feelings. You sacrifice your goals to avoid criticism. You sacrifice your voice to avoid conflict. You sacrifice your future to maintain your image. Eventually, you wake up and realize, I've spent years trying to make everyone comfortable, and I'm the one who became uncomfortable with my own life. Don't let that happen. Instead, develop what we could call selective approval. Not everyone deserves equal influence over you. There are people whose opinions matter. People who know you deeply. People who have demonstrated wisdom. People who have experience in the area you're trying to improve. People who genuinely care about your well-being. Listen to them. Learn from them. But don't confuse random opinions with meaningful feedback. A stranger on the internet doesn't know your entire life. A jealous person doesn't necessarily have useful advice. Someone who has never attempted what you're attempting may not understand the challenges you're facing. And someone who wants you to remain small may disguise control as concern. So become more selective. Before allowing someone's criticism to affect your confidence, ask, would I go to this person for advice? If the answer is no, don't suddenly give their opinion the authority of a trusted mentor simply because they criticized you. Now let's make this practical. I want you to perform a small experiment. For the next 7 days, deliberately stop doing one thing you normally do just to avoid judgment. Maybe you constantly check your appearance before leaving the house. Maybe you rewrite messages repeatedly because you're afraid of sounding foolish. Maybe you avoid speaking in meetings. Maybe you never post your work because you're worried people will criticize it. Maybe you apologize unnecessarily. Maybe you agree with people even when you disagree. Choose one. And for 7 days, practice doing the opposite. Not recklessly, not disrespectfully, just intentionally. If you normally over-explain, give a clear answer and stop. If you normally avoid speaking, contribute one thought. If you normally apologize for taking up space, remove the unnecessary apology. If you normally hide your work, allow yourself to be seen. And then watch what happens. At first, it may feel uncomfortable. Your brain may tell you, they're judging you. Maybe they are. And then what? That's the question. And then what? Someone judges you. You survive. Someone disagrees. You survive. Someone doesn't like you. You survive. Someone laughs. You survive. Someone says no. You survive. Every time you survive one of these experiences, your fear loses a little bit of power. This is how courage grows. Not by thinking about courage, by practicing it. The goal isn't to become someone who doesn't care about anything. The goal is to care about the right things. Care about your character. Care about your commitments. Care about your values. Care about the people you love. Care about the quality of your work. Care about the person you're becoming. But don't spend your entire life caring about whether strangers approve of every move you make. Because there will always be someone watching. Someone judging. Someone talking. Someone misunderstanding. You cannot control that, but you can control whether their opinions become the steering wheel of your life. And here's one final question I want you to carry with you. Whose opinion would you regret obeying if you reached the end of your life and realized you had built your entire life around it? Think about that. Because one day, you may realize that the people whose approval you desperately wanted were never going to live your life for you. They weren't going to carry your regrets. They weren't going to experience the opportunities you missed. They weren't going to wake up every morning inside the life you built. You were. So stop living as though everyone else is the audience and you're the performer. This is your life. You are the one who has to live with your decisions. And confidence begins when you become willing to live according to your values, even when approval isn't guaranteed. Remember, you don't need everyone to understand you. You need to understand yourself. You don't need everyone to like you. You need to respect yourself. You don't need everyone to believe in you. You need to stop abandoning your own belief every time someone doubts you. And you don't need to become fearless. You simply need to become more afraid of wasting your potential than you are of being judged. Because once you stop allowing other people's opinions to control your actions, you gain something incredibly valuable. Freedom. But freedom without self-trust can still lead you nowhere. You can stop caring what people think and still remain trapped by your own inconsistency. You can ignore the opinions of the world and still doubt yourself every time you face a difficult decision. So now we go deeper. The next question is, how do you actually build the kind of self-trust that makes confidence almost inevitable? That's what we're going to uncover in Chapter 3. Chapter 3. Build evidence that you can trust yourself. There is a reason some people walk into a difficult situation with calmness while others immediately begin to doubt themselves. It isn't always intelligence. It isn't always experience. And it certainly isn't because confident people never feel fear. Often, the difference is much simpler. They trust themselves. They have evidence that when things become difficult, they will respond. They've kept promises to themselves. They've faced uncomfortable situations. They've made difficult decisions. They've failed and recovered. They've started things they weren't ready for. And every one of those experiences has quietly taught their mind, I can count on me. That is the foundation of genuine confidence. Think about it. Would you confidently trust a stranger who constantly broke promises to you? If they said they would show up at 8 and repeatedly arrived at 10? If they promised to help and constantly disappeared? If they told you they would finish something and never did? You would eventually stop trusting them. Now consider this. What happens when you repeatedly make promises to yourself and break them? You say you're going to wake up early. You don't. You say you're going to exercise. You don't. You say you're going to finish the project. You postpone it. You say you're going to stop wasting time. You do it again tomorrow. You tell yourself you're going to make a change. Then another week passes. Eventually, something happens beneath the surface. Your conscious mind may still say, "I'm capable." But another part of you quietly responds, "We'll see." And that internal disagreement is one of the biggest sources of insecurity. You don't fully trust yourself. You know what you should do, but you don't believe you'll actually do it. And when you don't trust yourself, confidence becomes difficult to maintain. This is why repeating positive statements in the mirror can only take you so far. You can say, "I am confident. I am powerful. I am unstoppable." But if your daily behavior constantly contradicts those statements, your mind notices. Your brain is looking for evidence. And behavior is evidence. Every action you take tells your mind something about who you are. When you avoid something difficult, you may teach yourself, "I run away when things become uncomfortable." When you keep a promise, you teach yourself, "My word means something." When you finish something you wanted to quit, you teach yourself, "I can rely on myself." When you confront a difficult conversation instead of avoiding it, you teach yourself, "I can handle uncomfortable situations." This is how confidence is constructed. Not in one dramatic moment, but through hundreds of small interactions between you and yourself. Think of your confidence like a bank account. Every promise you keep is a deposit. Every challenge you face is a deposit. Every difficult task you complete is a deposit. Every time you act according to your values is a deposit. But every time you repeatedly lie to yourself, every time you make excuses, every time you abandon your commitments, every time you avoid something simply because you're afraid, you make a withdrawal. One withdrawal won't destroy your confidence, but thousands of them can. The good news is that the opposite is also true. You can rebuild it, and you don't have to start with something enormous. In fact, starting too big can make the problem worse. You decide you're going to completely transform your life overnight. Wake up at 5. Exercise for 2 hours. Read 50 pages. Start a business. Eat perfectly. Work 12 hours. Sleep perfectly. And within a few days, the entire plan collapses. Then you look at yourself and think, "I can't stick to anything." Don't do that. Start smaller. Make promises you can actually keep. Tell yourself, "Tomorrow I will wake up 30 minutes earlier." Then do it. Tell yourself, "Today I will spend 20 minutes working on the thing I've been avoiding." Then do it. Tell yourself, "I'm going to finish this task before I open social media." Then do it. These actions may seem insignificant. They're not. You're rebuilding a relationship. The relationship between you and yourself. And just like any relationship, trust is built through consistency. You don't tell someone you trust them. You demonstrate it. The same applies internally. You don't simply tell yourself that you're becoming confident. You demonstrate it. One decision at a time. One promise at a time. One uncomfortable action at a time. Now, there's another important principle here. Don't make promises to yourself casually. Your word should mean something. If you tell yourself you're going to do something, treat that commitment with the same seriousness you would give a commitment to another person. Because every time you casually break your own word, you teach yourself that your promises don't matter. And eventually, motivation becomes unreliable. You say, "I'll do it tomorrow." But your mind has heard that promise before. It doesn't believe you. So instead of making 10 promises, make one. And keep it. Then make another. And keep that one too. This is how self-respect grows. And self-respect is one of the hidden foundations of confidence. Because confidence without self-respect is often just performance. Someone can look powerful while secretly feeling worthless. They can talk loudly while desperately seeking approval. They can dominate conversations while being terrified of criticism. That's not real confidence. Real confidence is quieter. It comes from knowing, "I respect myself because I know how I behave when nobody is watching." That sentence should matter to you, because your public image is only one part of your identity. The private version of you is the one that builds confidence. What do you do when nobody is watching? Do you keep your commitments? Do you control your impulses? Do you finish what you start? Do you tell yourself the truth? Do you take responsibility when you make mistakes? Do you do difficult things even when you could easily avoid them? These are the moments that build you, not the moments when everyone is applauding. The private moments, the boring moments, the moments when nobody would ever know whether you followed through. Those are the moments when self-trust is created. Now let's talk about failure. Because if you're trying to build confidence, you will fail. You will break promises. You will procrastinate. You will make bad decisions. You will lose motivation. You will have days when you fall back into old habits. And if you interpret every failure as proof that you are incapable, you'll destroy the very confidence you're trying to build. Instead, learn how to repair trust. Suppose you told yourself you would exercise 5 days this week and you only exercise twice. Don't say, "I'm useless. I didn't keep the commitment." Why? Maybe the goal was unrealistic. Maybe your schedule was poorly designed. Maybe you didn't prepare. Maybe you allowed distractions to take over. Find the reason. Adjust the system. Start again. This is important. Self-trust doesn't require perfection. It requires repair. Think about a strong relationship. People who trust each other still make mistakes. The difference is that they acknowledge them, correct them, and continue. Do the same with yourself. If you fail, don't abandon yourself. Correct yourself. If you fall, don't stay on the ground just because you're embarrassed that you fell. Get back up. Every time you recover from failure instead of attacking yourself, you're teaching yourself. Even when I fail, I don't abandon me. That is powerful, because eventually, your confidence becomes less dependent on success. You no longer think, "I'll be confident if this works." Instead, you think, "I'll be okay whether this works or not." That is a completely different level of confidence. And it changes the way you take risks. Imagine going into an important meeting believing, "I must succeed." You'll probably be nervous. Now imagine going into that same meeting thinking, "I want this to work, but if it doesn't, I'll learn from it and keep moving." You become calmer. You become clearer. You become less desperate. And ironically, that often makes you perform better. The same applies to relationships. The same applies to business. The same applies to public speaking. The same applies to almost every area of life. When your identity doesn't depend on one outcome, you become harder to intimidate. So here's another exercise. I want you to create what I call a confidence evidence list. Take a piece of paper or open the Notes app on your phone. Write down 10 things you've done that prove you are capable. Don't make them all enormous. Maybe you survived a difficult period. Maybe you learned a complicated skill. Maybe you moved somewhere new. Maybe you supported your family. Maybe you started something from nothing. Maybe you overcame a fear. Maybe you kept going when you wanted to quit. Maybe you made a difficult decision. Maybe you recovered from failure. Maybe you simply kept going during a period when quitting would have been easier. Write them down. Then, whenever your mind says, "I can't do this," you have evidence to answer it. You're not trying to convince yourself with empty motivation. You're presenting evidence. And evidence is powerful. But now take this exercise one step further. Don't just record your past evidence. Start creating new evidence. Every day, do one thing that makes you proud of yourself. Not because someone else will see it, because you will. Make the difficult phone call. Finish the workout. Complete the assignment. Study for 30 minutes. Have the uncomfortable conversation. Wake up when you said you would. Put the phone away. Do the work. One action. Then another. Then another. Eventually, something begins to change. You don't have to constantly tell yourself that you're confident. You simply know. You have seen yourself perform under pressure. You have seen yourself recover. You have seen yourself keep going. You have seen yourself become disciplined. And your brain begins to recognize a new identity. This is who I am. That is when confidence becomes natural. Not because you hypnotized yourself into believing you're invincible, but because you've given yourself enough evidence to believe, whatever happens, I can handle it. And that brings us to an important realization. Confidence isn't the belief that nothing will go wrong. It is the belief that you can respond when something does. That's why some of the most confident people are not necessarily the people with the easiest lives. They may have faced rejection. They may have experienced failure. They may have made terrible mistakes. But those experiences gave them something valuable. Evidence. Evidence that they can survive difficult situations. Evidence that they can adapt. Evidence that they can rebuild. Evidence that they don't collapse every time life becomes unpredictable. And now it's your turn to create that evidence. Don't wait for some magical moment when you suddenly feel confident. Start behaving like someone who can trust themselves. Keep your promises. Start small. Do difficult things. Stop abandoning yourself when you make mistakes. Build evidence. And over time, your internal voice will change. Instead of, I hope I can do this, you'll begin thinking, I've handled difficult things before. I'll handle this too. That sentence is worth more than 1,000 motivational quotes. Because it isn't borrowed confidence. It's yours. And once you learn to trust yourself, there is another powerful dimension of confidence you need to master. Your body. Because before you say a single word, your posture, your breathing, your movements, and even your pace are already communicating something. And in Chapter 4, we're going to learn how to master your body before you master your mind. Chapter 4. Master your body before you master your mind. Before you speak, your body has already said something. Before you introduce yourself, your posture has already communicated something. Before you explain your idea, your face, your breathing, your movements, and even the speed at which you walk have already given people information about how comfortable you are in your own presence. This doesn't mean you need to become obsessed with body language. It means you need to understand something simple. Your body and your mind constantly influence each other. When you're nervous, your body often reveals it. You might speak faster. You might look away. You might fidget. You might cross your arms. You might shrink your posture. You might laugh nervously. You might constantly adjust your clothes. You might fill every silence with unnecessary words. And sometimes, these behaviors don't just reveal nervousness. They reinforce it. Your body is telling your brain, something is wrong. And your brain responds, you're right, we should be nervous. The cycle continues. But the cycle can work in the opposite direction. When you slow your breathing, when you relax your shoulders, when you stand upright, when you stop rushing, when you allow silence, you send your brain a different message. I'm safe. I can handle this. And that is where physical confidence becomes useful. Not as an act. Not as a trick to manipulate people. But as a way of training yourself to remain composed under pressure. Let's start with one of the simplest things. Your posture. Imagine two people entering the same room. The first walks quickly with their shoulders collapsed, eyes constantly moving, head slightly down, and hands nervously occupied. The second walks at a comfortable pace, stands upright, keeps their shoulders relaxed, looks around calmly, and doesn't seem desperate to disappear. Neither person has spoken, yet you've probably already formed an impression. That is how powerful physical presence can be. Now, I'm not telling you to walk around like you're in a military parade. Confidence isn't stiffness. In fact, excessive stiffness can communicate insecurity just as clearly as collapsing posture. The goal is relaxed strength. Stand tall. Keep your shoulders natural. Keep your head level. Let your body occupy the space it naturally needs. Don't shrink yourself. Don't exaggerate yourself. Just stand there as though you have every right to be there. Because you do. And this leads to another important principle. Stop apologizing with your body. Some people constantly make themselves smaller. They move out of the way even when there's plenty of space. They hunch over. They avoid eye contact. They speak quietly. They make themselves physically invisible. Sometimes this is politeness. But when it becomes a habit, it can reflect something deeper. The belief that your presence is an inconvenience. You need to challenge that belief. You are allowed to occupy space. You are allowed to be heard. You are allowed to take your time. You are allowed to enter a room without immediately trying to prove that you deserve to be there. Now let's talk about eye contact. Confident eye contact isn't staring. You don't need to lock onto someone's eyes without blinking. That's not confidence. That's a staring contest. Natural eye contact is simpler. When someone speaks, look at them. When you speak, look at them. Then allow your gaze to move naturally. The goal isn't to dominate. It's to communicate. I'm present. And being present is a major component of confidence. Nervous people often leave the present moment. Their body is sitting in the room, but their mind is somewhere else. They're thinking, do I look stupid? What should I say next? Did that sound intelligent? Why did I say that? What are they thinking about me? Their attention is constantly turned inward, and that creates more anxiety. Confidence often comes from doing the opposite. Instead of monitoring yourself, focus on the other person. Listen, observe, respond. Be where you are. When you're fully present, you have less mental energy available for self-consciousness, and that makes you appear more confident naturally. Now let's talk about something incredibly powerful: your speaking pace. When people are nervous, they often speed up. They want to get their words out before someone interrupts them. They want to escape the attention. They want to finish the conversation. So they speak faster, and faster, and faster. Their voice becomes rushed. Their sentences become less clear. Then they notice the other person looking confused. Now they're even more nervous. Slow down. You don't need to rush your words. Give yourself permission to pause. A pause doesn't mean you don't know what you're doing. A pause can communicate thoughtfulness. Think about people you consider confident. Many of them don't seem desperate to fill every second. They can stop, then speak. This is especially important when someone asks you a difficult question. You don't have to answer instantly. Take a breath, then respond. That tiny moment can completely change how you communicate. And it changes how you feel too. Because you're telling yourself, I don't need to panic. I have time. Now let's discuss silence. Many insecure people are afraid of silence. Someone asks them a question. They answer. Then immediately add another sentence. Then another. Then another. They explain. They justify. They clarify something nobody asked them to clarify. But because silence feels like judgment. If I stop talking, they'll think I don't know what I'm doing. But confident people understand that silence isn't automatically uncomfortable. Sometimes silence is simply silence. You don't need to fill every empty space. If you make a statement and someone doesn't respond immediately, don't panic. If you ask a question and they take a moment, let them think. If someone challenges your opinion, don't immediately defend yourself with 10 paragraphs. First, listen. Respond. This brings us to another powerful habit. Stop over-explaining. Over-explaining often comes from the fear that your decision won't be accepted unless you provide enough justification. You say no. Then you explain why. Then you explain the explanation. Then you apologize. Then you offer alternatives. And by the end of the conversation, the other person has more information than they ever needed. You don't have to do that. Sometimes, no, I can't, is enough. Sometimes, that's not going to work for me, is enough. Sometimes, I've decided to do something different, is enough. The less desperate you are to convince someone of your right to make a decision, the more composed you become. Now, let's talk about your breathing. This may sound simple, but breathing is one of the fastest ways to influence your physical state. When you're anxious, your breathing often becomes shallow and fast. When you're calm, your breathing tends to become slower and more controlled. So when you feel nervous before an important moment, don't immediately fight the feeling. First, control your breathing. Slow down. Take a deeper breath. Relax your shoulders. Exhale slowly. Then repeat. You're giving your nervous system a different signal. You're telling your body, we don't need to run. This is especially useful before an interview, a presentation, a difficult conversation, a meeting, a social situation, a negotiation, an important decision. The goal isn't to eliminate nervousness. Remember what we've already discussed. Confidence isn't fearlessness. You can be nervous and still be composed. You can feel fear and still speak clearly. You can have uncertainty and still stand upright. That is real strength. Now, here's a challenge I want you to try. For the next 7 days, practice moving through the world more slowly. Not ridiculously slowly. Intentionally slowly. Walk without rushing when you don't need to. Put your phone away when you're speaking to someone. Take a breath before answering questions. Pause instead of filling silence. Relax your shoulders. Keep your head up. Maintain natural eye contact. Speak clearly. And notice how different you feel. At first, you might feel strange. That's normal. You're changing a pattern. You may even feel as though you're pretending. But remember, you're not trying to convince other people that you're confident. You're practicing the physical habits that make composure easier. Eventually, they become natural. And something else begins to happen. People respond differently to you. They may listen more carefully. They may interrupt you less. They may perceive you as more composed. But don't become obsessed with how they react. That's not the purpose. Remember Chapter 2. We're not building confidence by becoming obsessed with other people's opinions. We're building confidence by becoming comfortable with ourselves. Your body should not become another performance for an audience. It should become a tool for your own self-control. And that distinction matters. Because there is a dangerous trap in the confidence world. People become obsessed with appearing powerful. They study poses. They memorize tricks. They learn how to dominate conversations. They try to make themselves look intimidating. But underneath all of it, they're still afraid. That's not confidence. That's insecurity wearing a costume. Real confidence doesn't require constant performance. You don't need to make yourself look important. You simply need to become comfortable being present, comfortable taking your time, comfortable being seen, comfortable being heard, comfortable with silence, comfortable with your own body. And that comfort becomes presence. Presence becomes composure. And composure becomes powerful. But now we have to confront something deeper. Because you can control your posture. You can control your breathing. You can slow your speech. You can improve your eye contact. And yet, there will still be moments when your heart races. There will still be situations that scare you. There will still be conversations you'd rather avoid. There will still be opportunities that make you uncomfortable. And that's where the next level of confidence begins. You don't become confident by eliminating discomfort. You become confident by becoming comfortable with discomfort. Because every time you willingly enter a situation that scares you and discover that you can handle it, you expand the limits of what you believe you're capable of. And in Chapter 5, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to learn how to stop running from discomfort and start using it to build an unshakable mind. Chapter 5. Become comfortable with discomfort. There is a secret about confidence that most people discover far too late. You don't become confident by making your life more comfortable. You become confident by proving to yourself that you can handle discomfort. That distinction changes everything. Most people organize their lives around avoiding uncomfortable feelings. They avoid difficult conversations. They avoid rejection. They avoid speaking in front of people. They avoid asking for what they want. They avoid taking risks. They avoid looking foolish. They avoid situations where they might fail. And every time they successfully avoid discomfort, they experience a temporary sense of relief. That's the trap. Relief feels good. So your brain learns. Avoiding this worked. The next time the situation appears, you avoid it again. And again. And again. Eventually, The thing you keep avoiding becomes bigger in your mind than it ever was in reality. A simple phone call becomes terrifying. A presentation becomes overwhelming. A rejection becomes catastrophic. A difficult conversation becomes impossible. The fear grows because it is never challenged. This is how a person can become trapped without ever being physically restricted. Their world becomes smaller, not because they can't do certain things, but because they've trained themselves to avoid anything that makes them uncomfortable. And that is the opposite of confidence. Confidence expands your world. Fear shrinks it. So if you want dangerously strong confidence, you need to reverse the pattern. Instead of asking, "How can I avoid feeling uncomfortable?" start asking, "What discomfort can I handle today?" That is a completely different question, because discomfort itself is not the enemy. Sometimes discomfort is the doorway. Think about exercise. Your muscles become stronger because they are placed under stress. Think about learning. Your mind develops because it encounters things it doesn't already understand. Think about resilience. You develop it by facing situations that test you. Confidence works the same way. You need resistance. You need challenge. You need moments when your brain says, "I don't know if I can do this." And then you do it anyway. That's how you collect evidence. That's how your internal limits expand. Now, understand something important. Being comfortable with discomfort does not mean being reckless. You don't need to put yourself in dangerous situations. You don't need to deliberately create chaos. You don't need to suffer for the sake of suffering. The goal is productive discomfort, the kind that makes you stronger, the kind that challenges your fear, the kind that expands your capabilities. For one person, that might mean speaking in a meeting. For another, it might mean starting a business. For someone else, it might mean going to the gym consistently. For another person, it might mean telling someone how they genuinely feel. Your discomfort is personal, and you know exactly where yours lies. There are things you've been avoiding. You know what they are. Maybe you've been telling yourself, "I'll do it when I'm ready." But here's the problem. Readiness is often created through action. You don't wait until you're confident enough to act. You act, and the action gradually makes you more confident. This is why courage is often the predecessor of confidence. Courage says, "I'm afraid, but I'm going anyway." Confidence later says, "I've done this before. I can handle it." Think about someone who has never spoken publicly. The first presentation may feel terrifying. Their heart races. Their hands shake. Their voice may become unsteady. They may forget a sentence. They may walk away thinking, "That was terrible." But then something happens. They survived. The world didn't end. They try again. The second time is slightly easier. The third time is easier still. Eventually, speaking in front of people becomes normal. What changed? Not necessarily the environment. Their relationship with discomfort changed. They stopped interpreting nervousness as a command to retreat. That is the skill you need. When fear appears, don't immediately ask, "How do I make this feeling disappear?" Can I continue while feeling this? That question is incredibly powerful because it separates emotion from action. You can feel nervous and still make the phone call. You can feel uncertain and still start the project. You can feel embarrassed and still speak. You can feel rejected and still move forward. You can feel afraid and still act. Your feelings are real, but they don't have to be your instructions. Think of fear as an alarm. An alarm tells you to pay attention. It doesn't always tell you to run. Sometimes the alarm is accurate. Sometimes it is outdated. Sometimes it is simply reacting to uncertainty. Your job is to evaluate it, not obey it automatically. This is one of the biggest shifts you can make in your life. Stop saying, "I'm afraid, therefore I shouldn't do it." Start saying, "I'm afraid. Is there still a reason to do it?" If the answer is yes, move. This is how you begin training yourself. And you can start extremely small. You don't have to transform your life tomorrow. Start with tiny acts of courage. Make the call you've been postponing. Ask the question you've been afraid to ask. Speak once during the meeting. Introduce yourself to someone new. Tell someone what you actually think. Go somewhere alone. Publish something you've created. Apply for the opportunity. Ask for the price you believe your work deserves. Say no when you genuinely mean no. Each one is a repetition. And every repetition tells your brain, I can tolerate this. Eventually, I can tolerate this. Becomes, I can handle this. And eventually, this isn't even that difficult anymore. That's how fear loses its power. Not because you defeated it in one dramatic battle, but because you repeatedly showed it that it doesn't control you. Now, let's talk about rejection. Rejection is one of the most powerful forms of discomfort because it attacks something deeply human, our desire to belong. You ask someone out. They say no. You apply for the opportunity. You don't get it. You make an offer. They reject it. You share your idea. Someone dismisses it. And immediately, the mind wants to create a story. I'm not good enough. Nobody wants me. I'm a failure. I should stop trying. But rejection doesn't necessarily mean any of those things. Sometimes rejection simply means, that's it. Not now. Not this person. Not this opportunity. Not this offer. Not this situation. A rejection is a result. It isn't automatically an identity. And once you understand this, rejection becomes less frightening. You begin to see it as part of the process. If you're never rejected, you may not be asking for enough. If you're never uncomfortable, you may not be growing enough. If you're never failing, you may not be attempting enough. This doesn't mean you should chase failure. It means you shouldn't build your life around avoiding it. Because avoiding failure also means avoiding many opportunities for success. Think about how many people never start because they are afraid of failing. They protect themselves from disappointment. And in doing so, they guarantee another kind of disappointment. The regret of never trying. That regret can last much longer. A failed attempt can teach you something. A life spent avoiding attempts can leave you wondering what could have happened. So become willing to experience temporary embarrassment in exchange for long-term growth. Become willing to experience temporary rejection in exchange for meaningful opportunities. Become willing to experience temporary discomfort in exchange for permanent expansion. Now let's introduce a simple rule. The discomfort rule. Every day, deliberately do one thing you don't want to do but know you should. It doesn't have to be dramatic. Maybe you don't want to exercise. Do it. Maybe you don't want to make the call. Make it. Maybe you don't want to study. Study. Maybe you don't want to clean your workspace. Clean it. Maybe you don't want to have the conversation. Have it. Maybe you don't want to put your work out into the world. Publish it. The point isn't the specific action. The point is teaching yourself. I don't need to obey every uncomfortable feeling. That is an incredibly valuable skill. Because your emotions are going to change constantly. Some mornings you'll feel motivated. Some mornings you won't. Some days you'll feel confident. Some days you'll doubt yourself. Some days you'll feel powerful. Some days you'll feel exhausted. If your behavior depends entirely on how you feel, your life becomes unpredictable. Discipline gives you another option. You can say, I don't feel like doing this, but I'm doing it anyway. That sentence is a form of freedom, because you're no longer controlled by your immediate emotional state. You're choosing your actions based on your values and goals. And that is confidence in action. Now let's talk about one of the most uncomfortable experiences of all. Being seen. Being seen means allowing people to see you try. Not just the finished product. The attempt. The learning. The mistakes. The imperfect version. This is why many people never create anything publicly. They don't want to be seen as beginners. They don't want people to watch them struggle. They don't want criticism. They want to become excellent privately and then appear successful publicly. But life rarely works that way. You become excellent through repetition. And repetition requires being willing to look imperfect. So allow yourself to be a beginner. Allow yourself to make mistakes. Allow yourself to have awkward moments. Allow yourself to ask stupid questions. Allow yourself to say, "I don't know yet." Those 3 words can actually be incredibly confident, because insecure people often pretend to know everything. Confident people can admit what they don't know. They understand that ignorance in one area doesn't threaten their identity. It simply gives them something to learn. And that brings us to another powerful principle. You don't need to protect your ego from every uncomfortable experience. Your ego wants to look competent. Confidence wants to become competent. Those are different things. Your ego says, "Don't try because you might look foolish." Confidence says, "Try. You might learn something." Your ego says, "Don't ask because they might say no." Confidence says, "Ask. Let the answer be the answer." Your ego says, "Don't speak because someone might disagree." Confidence says, "Speak respectfully and accept disagreement." Your ego wants certainty. Confidence can operate without it. And that is why confidence becomes stronger when you deliberately expose yourself to uncertainty. You teach yourself that you don't need to know exactly what will happen before you move. You can adapt. You can respond. You can figure things out. Remember the foundation from Chapter 3. Self-trust comes from evidence. Every uncomfortable situation you face gives you an opportunity to create more evidence. You face the difficult conversation. Evidence. You survive rejection. Evidence. You speak despite nervousness. Evidence. You try again after failure. Evidence. You keep your commitment when motivation disappears. Evidence. Eventually, you have accumulated so much evidence that fear loses its authority. You still feel it, but you no longer worship it. You no longer treat it as the final decision maker. And that is what makes someone dangerous. Not dangerous because they hurt people, but dangerous because they are difficult to stop. They can tolerate uncertainty. They can tolerate criticism. They can tolerate rejection. They can tolerate temporary failure. They can tolerate discomfort. And because they can tolerate these things, they can pursue opportunities that other people are too afraid to pursue. So here's your challenge. For the next 30 days, keep a discomfort log. Every day, write down, "What did I do today that made me uncomfortable?" Then write, "What happened?" And finally, "What did I learn about myself?" You will begin noticing something. The things that once terrified you become ordinary. Not because you became a different species. Because you trained yourself. You expanded your capacity. You taught your nervous system that discomfort is survivable. And once discomfort becomes survivable, action becomes easier. Once action becomes easier, confidence grows. And once confidence grows, your world expands. That's the transformation. You don't need a life without fear. You need a life where fear doesn't make your decisions. So the next time you feel that familiar hesitation, that tightness in your chest, that urge to postpone, that voice saying, "Maybe later," and ask yourself, is this actually dangerous or is it simply uncomfortable? If it's genuinely dangerous, step back. But if it's simply uncomfortable, consider stepping forward. Because the life you want is often hiding behind things you are currently afraid to do. And every time you walk toward discomfort instead of away from it, you become a little stronger, a little calmer, a little more capable, a little more confident. But there is another place where discomfort becomes especially important. Your relationships. Because one of the hardest things a confident person must learn is how to disappoint people without betraying themselves. How to say no. How to establish boundaries. How to stop explaining every decision. How to stop confusing kindness with submission. And that is exactly where we're going next. In Chapter 6, we're going to learn how to say no without feeling guilty. Chapter 6, Learn to say no without feeling guilty. One of the clearest signs that you are becoming confident is not how easily you say yes. It is how calmly you can say no. Because saying yes is easy when you want approval. Yes keeps people happy. Yes avoids conflict. Yes prevents uncomfortable conversations. Yes makes you feel useful. Yes allows you to temporarily avoid disappointment. But every unnecessary yes comes with a hidden cost. Your time, your energy, your attention, your priorities, and sometimes your self-respect. This is why learning to say no is not simply a communication skill. It is a confidence skill. Because every time you say yes to something you genuinely don't want to do, simply because you're afraid of someone's reaction, you're sending yourself a message. Their comfort matters more than my own boundaries. Do that often enough, and something begins to happen. You become resentful. You become exhausted. You become frustrated with people. But here's the strange part. The people around you may not even realize what is happening. But because you said yes, you told them it was fine. You smiled. You agreed. You helped. And then you went home angry that they expected you to do it. This is one of the biggest problems with people-pleasing. You don't communicate your boundary. Then you become angry when someone crosses a boundary they didn't know existed. Confidence requires honesty. Not cruelty. Not selfishness. Honesty. If you don't want to do something, you need to become comfortable saying so. And that can be extremely difficult, especially if you've spent years believing that being a good person means being available to everyone. But being a good person doesn't mean having unlimited access. You can be generous without being endlessly available. You can be kind without saying yes to everything. You can care about people without sacrificing yourself every time they ask. And you can disappoint someone without doing something wrong. Let's make that last point very clear. Disappointing someone is not the same as harming someone. Someone can be disappointed because you said no. That doesn't automatically mean you were selfish. Someone can be unhappy because you changed your plans. That doesn't automatically mean you betrayed them. Someone can disagree with your boundary. That doesn't automatically mean the boundary is unreasonable. You need to become comfortable allowing other people to experience emotions that you did not cause intentionally and cannot control. This is difficult for people-pleasers because they often feel responsible for everyone's emotional state. Someone is upset. What did I do? Someone is disappointed. How can I fix this? Someone is angry. Maybe I should apologize. Someone doesn't like your decision. Maybe I should change it. So, other people's emotions are information. They are not automatically instructions. Someone being angry doesn't mean you need to surrender. Someone being disappointed doesn't mean you need to reverse your decision. Someone being unhappy doesn't mean you did something wrong. You need to learn the difference between guilt and responsibility. Guilt says, I feel bad, therefore I must have done something wrong. Responsibility asks, did I actually violate my values or harm someone? Those are very different questions. Sometimes you will feel guilty simply because you're doing something unfamiliar. If you've spent 10 years saying yes to everyone, your first few no's may feel incredibly uncomfortable. That discomfort doesn't necessarily mean you're making a mistake. It may simply mean you're developing a new boundary. Think about exercise again. The first time you train a muscle, it may feel uncomfortable. That doesn't mean the exercise is damaging you. Sometimes discomfort is evidence that you're adapting. The same can happen emotionally. The first time you say, no, I can't do that, you may feel guilty. The second time, less. The third time, even less. Eventually, it becomes normal. You stop experiencing every boundary as a crisis. Now, let's talk about how you actually say no. Because confidence isn't only about having boundaries. It's about communicating them clearly. And one of the biggest mistakes people make is over-explaining. They say, I'm really sorry, I wish I could, but you know, things have been really busy lately and I have this other thing, and maybe if things were different. By the end of the explanation, they've practically invited the other person to negotiate. You don't always need a courtroom defense for your decision. Sometimes the most confident response is simple. No, I can't. That's it. Or, that doesn't work for me. Or, I won't be able to do that. Or, I appreciate you asking, but I'll pass. Notice something. None of these statements are aggressive. They're simply clear. And clarity is powerful. You don't need to make the other person feel guilty for asking. You don't need to attack them. You don't need to explain every detail of your life. You simply communicate your decision. Now, sometimes you will need to explain. That's fine. The point isn't that explanations are bad. The point is that over-explaining often comes from fear. Ask yourself, am I explaining this because the person genuinely needs information, or because I'm afraid they won't accept my decision? That question can reveal a lot. If the answer is the second one, practice stopping after the necessary information. Let the silence exist. Let them respond. You don't have to rush in and rescue them from disappointment. This is where the confidence we built in Chapter 4 becomes useful. Remember? Slow down. Breathe. Don't fill every silence. Imagine someone asks, "Can you lend me money?" You don't want to. Instead of creating a complicated story, you could simply say, "No, I can't do that." They may ask why. You can respond, "It's not something I'm comfortable doing." And stop. They may push again. You don't need to invent a new explanation. You can calmly repeat, "I understand, but my answer is still no." That's called holding your boundary. And it requires something we've already discussed. Tolerance for discomfort. Because sometimes the difficult part isn't saying no. It's maintaining the no after someone pushes back. This is where many people collapse. They say no. The other person reacts. They feel guilty. They change their answer. Now the other person learns something. Pressure works. And the next time, they'll probably apply pressure again. But if you remain calm and consistent, people gradually learn that your boundaries are real. That doesn't mean everyone will like them. Some people won't. And that's important. Because one of the hardest lessons in confidence is this. You cannot build strong boundaries and guarantee universal approval at the same time. Someone will eventually call you selfish. Someone may say you've changed. Someone may accuse you of not caring. Someone may try to make you feel guilty. You need to remain calm. Don't immediately become defensive. Don't launch into a 20-minute explanation. Don't attack them. Simply communicate your position. I understand you feel that way, but this is still my decision. That's confidence. Calm firmness. Not aggression. There is also another side to saying no. Sometimes you need to say no to yourself. This is where boundaries become even more powerful. No to another hour of mindless scrolling. No to another excuse. No to another unnecessary purchase. No to another night of procrastination. No to another relationship that repeatedly destroys your peace. No to another commitment you don't actually care about. No to the version of you that constantly chooses short-term comfort over long-term growth. Confidence isn't only the ability to reject other people's demands. It is also the ability to reject your own destructive impulses. Because if you can't say no to yourself, you will eventually become controlled by whatever feels good in the moment. And a person who cannot control themselves will struggle to feel genuinely powerful. So ask yourself, what do I need to start saying no to? Maybe it's distractions. Maybe it's unhealthy habits. Maybe it's unnecessary obligations. Maybe it's people who repeatedly disrespect your boundaries. Maybe it's your own excuses. And then ask, what do I need to start saying yes to? Yes to your goals. Yes to discipline. Yes to learning. Yes to difficult conversations. Yes to opportunities. Yes to your own priorities. Every no creates space for a yes. Your time is limited. Your attention is limited. Your energy is limited. You cannot say yes to everything. So every yes is also a no to something else. When you say yes to someone else's unnecessary demand, you're often saying no to your own priorities. Think about that. When you spend 3 hours doing something you never wanted to do, those 3 hours came from somewhere. They came from your life. You cannot get them back. This is why boundaries are not selfish. They are a form of resource management. You are protecting the limited resources required to build the life you want. Now, there is a misconception that confident people are always assertive. Not necessarily. Some confident people are incredibly gentle. Some are quiet. Some are soft-spoken. The difference is that their kindness is a choice. It isn't fear. They help because they want to help. They say yes because they mean yes. And when they say no, they don't collapse under guilt. That is the goal. You don't want to become someone who says no to everything. You want to become someone whose yes actually means yes. Because when you say yes out of fear, your yes has very little value. But when people know that you are capable of saying no, your yes becomes meaningful. They know you genuinely chose it. That's integrity. And integrity creates self-respect. Now let's practice. For the next 7 days, notice every time you say yes. Before agreeing, pause for 3 seconds. Then ask yourself, do I actually want to do this? Do I have the time? Does this support my priorities? Am I saying yes because I want to, or because I'm afraid of their reaction? You don't have to reject everything. Just become conscious. That pause alone can change your behavior. Because many people say yes automatically. Someone asks. They answer, sure. Then regret it 5 minutes later. Break that pattern. Give yourself permission to think. You can say, let me check my schedule and get back to you. That's a powerful sentence. It creates space between the request and your response. And in that space, you can make a decision instead of reacting. Remember, confidence is the ability to choose. Not the ability to dominate. Not the ability to intimidate. Not the ability to get your way. The ability to choose. Choose where your time goes. Choose who gets access to you. Choose what you tolerate. Choose what you pursue. Choose what you walk away from. And choose what you refuse to become. That is freedom. But there is one final lesson about saying no. Sometimes you will say no and people will leave. Sometimes setting boundaries will reveal who only liked you because you were easy to control. Sometimes becoming more confident will change your relationships. And that can hurt. But ask yourself, would you rather be loved for who you are, or tolerated because you never say no? Would you rather have relationships based on honesty, or relationships maintained through self-abandonment? Would you rather disappoint someone temporarily, or disappoint yourself for years? The answers matter, because your confidence cannot grow if you constantly betray yourself to preserve other people's comfort. You must learn to stand behind your decisions, calmly, respectfully, without unnecessary guilt. And remember this, you are not responsible for making everyone happy. You are responsible for living with integrity. You are responsible for communicating honestly. You are responsible for treating people with respect. And you are responsible for protecting the life you're building. So the next time you need to say no, don't turn it into a war. Don't become aggressive. Don't become cold. Simply be clear. Look at the person. Breathe. Speak. And let the answer stand. No, that doesn't work for me. Then move forward. Because every time you set a healthy boundary, you send yourself another powerful message. My time matters. My energy matters. My priorities matter. My decisions matter. And most importantly, I matter. That is not arrogance. That is self-respect. But there is another threat to confidence that can quietly undo everything we've built so far. Even if you trust yourself, even if you can handle discomfort, even if you can set boundaries, you can still destroy your confidence by constantly looking sideways at everyone else, comparing your life to theirs, your body to theirs, your money to theirs, your career to theirs, your progress to theirs. And that is where we're going next. In Chapter 7, we're going to learn how to stop comparing yourself to everyone and build your own scoreboard instead. Chapter 7. Stop comparing yourself to everyone. There is a game you can never win. It has no finish line, no final score, no moment when you can finally say, I've won. The game is comparison. You compare your body to someone else's. your income to someone else's, your relationship to someone else's, your career to someone else's, your intelligence to someone else's, your home, your car, your business, your achievements, your social life, your appearance, your progress. And the strange thing is that you can be doing incredibly well and still feel like you're losing. But because you've chosen a scoreboard that was never designed for you. Think about what happens when you scroll through social media. You see someone celebrating a new business, someone buying a house, someone getting married, someone traveling, someone showing their body transformation, someone announcing a promotion, someone celebrating $1 million milestone. And suddenly your own life feels smaller. You forget everything you've accomplished. You forget how far you've come. You forget the problems you've already survived. You forget the things you're still building. And your brain says, look at where they are. Look at where you are. But there's a problem. You are comparing your behind the scenes to someone else's highlight reel. You know your doubts. You know your failures. You know your financial struggles. You know your mistakes. You know how many times you've almost quit. You know the opportunities you missed. But when you look at someone else, you usually see the finished photograph. You don't see the uncertainty behind it. You don't see the failed attempts. You don't see the years of work. You don't see the private struggles. You don't see the sacrifices. You don't see what their life actually costs them. You see the result. Then you compare it to your process. That's not a fair comparison. And yet millions of people do it every day. Comparison is especially dangerous because it can disguise itself as ambition. You tell yourself, I'm just trying to improve. But secretly you're thinking, I need to become better than them. That's a different game. And if your motivation is based on being ahead of other people, you will never experience lasting satisfaction. Because there will always be someone ahead. Someone richer, someone younger, someone stronger, someone more attractive, someone more successful, someone with more followers, someone with a bigger house, someone with a better career, someone with a seemingly perfect life. If your confidence depends on being above everyone else, your confidence is permanently fragile, because someone can always take that position. This is why real confidence doesn't come from believing, I'm better than everyone. It comes from believing, I don't need to be better than everyone to respect myself. That's freedom. You stop competing in games you never agreed to play. You stop measuring your worth using someone else's achievements. And you begin building something much more powerful. Your own scoreboard. Your personal scoreboard measures one person. Not your neighbor. Not your competitor. Not the influencer online. Not your former classmates. The question becomes, am I becoming better than the person I was? That is a much more useful question. Maybe last year you couldn't control your spending. Now you can. That's progress. Maybe 6 months ago you couldn't speak confidently in meetings. Now you can. That's progress. Maybe you used to avoid difficult conversations. Now you're willing to have them. That's progress. Maybe you used to give up after one failure. Now you try again. That's progress. Maybe you used to need everyone's approval. Now you can make decisions independently. That's progress. These victories may not look impressive on social media, but they can completely change your life. And here's the important part. Your progress doesn't need to be impressive to be valuable. A 1% improvement repeated consistently can completely transform you over time. The problem is that modern culture trains us to look for dramatic results. We want the business to explode, the body to transform, the bank account to multiply, the audience to grow, the skill to become perfect. We want visible proof immediately. But meaningful growth is often invisible for a long time. You study. Nothing seems to happen. You exercise. The mirror barely changes. You save. The account grows slowly. You practice speaking. You still feel nervous. You work on yourself. Nobody notices. And this is where many people quit. It's not working. But something is happening. You're building. The seed doesn't look like the tree. The early stage of transformation rarely looks impressive. That's why you need your own scoreboard. Because if you only measure visible outcomes, you'll overlook invisible progress. So instead of measuring only results, measure behaviors. Did I keep my promise today? Did I do the difficult thing? Did I control my emotions? Did I protect my time? Did I learn something? Did I move closer to my goal? Did I behave like the person I want to become? Those questions create a much healthier form of confidence. Because now, your confidence isn't dependent on external applause. It's connected to your behavior. And behavior is something you can control. You can't control whether someone else succeeds. You can't control how quickly another person's business grows. You can't control how attractive someone else is. You can't control how much money someone else earns. But you can control what you do today. That's where your power lives. Now, there is another problem with comparison. It makes you underestimate your own advantages. You may be looking at someone else's success and thinking, "Why don't I have that?" But you're ignoring the resources you already possess. Your experience, your relationships, your knowledge, your location, your personality, your skills, your failures, your perspective, your story. Your circumstances may not be perfect, but they are yours. And your job isn't to build someone else's life. It's to build the best version of the life available to you. That's why comparison needs to be replaced with curiosity. Instead of, "Why are they ahead of me? What can I learn from them?" That's a powerful shift. Now another person's success doesn't threaten you. It teaches you. Someone built a successful company? Study them. Someone became excellent at communication? Learn from them. Someone developed incredible discipline? Observe their habits. Someone built a strong relationship? Look at what they do differently. You don't have to resent someone else's success to pursue your own. You can admire them and still build your own path. This is what confident people do. They can appreciate someone else's greatness without feeling diminished by it. They can say, "They're impressive," without secretly thinking, "Therefore I am inadequate." Those two things can exist separately. Someone can be excellent, and you can still be valuable. Someone can succeed, and you can still succeed. Someone can be ahead, and you can still be moving forward. There is room for more than one person to win. Now, let's talk about social media. You don't necessarily need to delete it, but you need to understand what it does to your mind. If you constantly consume carefully selected images of other people's success, your brain can begin treating those images as normal. You see luxury every day. Suddenly, your ordinary life feels poor. You see perfect bodies. Your normal body feels inadequate. You see constant business success. Your gradual progress feels like failure. You see people constantly traveling. Your daily routine feels boring. But remember, you're consuming an edited reality. Nobody posts every ordinary Tuesday. Nobody posts every failed meeting. Nobody posts every argument. Nobody posts every rejection. Nobody posts every night they lay awake wondering what they're doing with their life. They show the moments worth showing. That's fine. But don't confuse the display with the entire reality. And don't use someone else's display as evidence against yourself. Now, here's something powerful. Instead of asking, "How far behind am I?" "How far have I come?" Go back 1 year. What were you worried about then? What did you not know? What could you not do? What habits did you have? What fears controlled you? What problems seemed impossible? Now look at yourself today. Maybe you've made mistakes. Maybe you're not where you want to be. That's okay. But if you've grown, acknowledge it. Confidence needs recognition. Not from strangers. From you. You need to notice your own progress. Otherwise, you'll constantly move the goalpost. You achieve one thing. Immediately. Not enough. You achieve another. Still not enough. You reach a goal. Now I need this. and the cycle never ends. Ambition is useful, but ambition without appreciation can become psychological starvation. You need both. Drive and gratitude. Want more? But recognize what you've already built. Set bigger goals. But don't insult your current progress. Improve yourself. But don't hate yourself into improvement. That last point matters. People sometimes believe that harsh self-criticism creates motivation. If I call myself lazy enough, maybe I'll work harder. Sometimes criticism can create short-term action, but long-term growth is usually stronger when it comes from self-respect. Instead of, I'm pathetic, to, I'm capable of more, and I'm going to prove it through my actions. Instead of, I'm behind everyone, to, I'm not where I want to be yet, so let's determine the next step. Instead of, why am I like this? What behavior needs to change? Move from identity attacks to behavioral correction. That is a much stronger mindset. Now let's build your personal scoreboard. Take a piece of paper and divide it into several categories. Career or business, money, relationships, skills, discipline, confidence. For each category, choose one measurable behavior. For health, exercise 4 times a week. For money, save a specific amount each month. For skills, study 30 minutes every day. For confidence, do one uncomfortable thing each day. For relationships, have one meaningful conversation each week. For discipline, keep my morning routine 5 days a week. Now measure yourself against the scoreboard, not against somebody else's life. At the end of each week, ask, what did I improve? Where did I fail? What will I change next week? That's it. No drama, no self-hatred, no comparison, just measurement and adjustment. This creates something incredibly powerful. You become your own competition. And when you're your own competition, you never run out of opportunities to improve. Yesterday's version of you becomes the opponent, not someone else's success. Your previous limitations. That mindset creates continuous growth. And eventually you realize something. The person you were desperately trying to become better than was never the real enemy. The real enemy was the version of yourself that kept telling you, you're not capable. You're too far behind. It's too late. Everyone else is better. You don't have what it takes. You don't defeat that voice by arguing with it. You defeat it through evidence. You work. You improve. You learn. You practice. You keep promises. You take risks. You become stronger. And eventually, the voice gets quieter. Not because you shouted louder. Because reality gave you new evidence. You became the evidence. So stop looking sideways. Look forward. Then look backward. Forward to determine where you're going. Backward to recognize how far you've come. But don't spend your entire journey looking sideways at people running a completely different race. Your timeline is yours. Your starting point is yours. Your obstacles are yours. Your opportunities are yours. Your path is yours. And your scoreboard should be yours too. Remember, someone else's success is not your failure. Someone else's beauty is not your ugliness. Someone else's wealth is not your poverty. Someone else's progress is not your stagnation. You are allowed to admire someone without becoming obsessed with becoming them. You are allowed to learn from someone without feeling inferior to them. You are allowed to move at your own pace. And most importantly, you are allowed to build confidence without needing to win someone else's race. Because the ultimate goal isn't to walk into a room and think, I'm better than everyone here. The ultimate goal is to walk into that room thinking, I know who I am. I know what I'm working toward. And I don't need to compare myself to anyone here. That is a much stronger position. But confidence isn't only about what you think internally. It is also about what happens when you open your mouth. How you express yourself. How you disagree. How you make decisions. How you communicate under pressure. Because you can be highly capable and still undermine yourself every time you speak. You can know exactly what you believe and communicate it like you're asking permission. You can have a great idea and present it with uncertainty. You can have a boundary and communicate it apologetically. So in Chapter 8, we're going to take confidence into one of the most powerful areas of human interaction: how to speak with authority without becoming arrogant. Chapter 8. Speak with authority. You can be intelligent and still sound uncertain. You can be capable and still communicate weakness. You can have a great idea and still present it as though you're asking permission to have it. And sometimes the problem isn't what you're saying. It's how you're saying it. Your words communicate information, but your delivery communicates confidence. Think about the difference between these two statements. I don't know if this makes sense, but maybe we could possibly try something like this? Here's what I think we should do. The idea may be exactly the same, but the second statement carries something different. Certainty, clarity, ownership. That is what speaking with authority means. It doesn't mean speaking loudly. It doesn't mean dominating conversations. It doesn't mean interrupting people. It doesn't mean pretending to know everything. And it certainly doesn't mean becoming aggressive. Authority is much simpler. You communicate your thoughts without constantly apologizing for having them. That is a skill, and it can be learned. Let's start with one of the most common habits that weakens communication: unnecessary uncertainty. Listen to how often people use phrases like, I think, maybe, perhaps, I'm not sure, but, this might sound stupid, I could be wrong, sorry, but. Sometimes these phrases are appropriate. If you're genuinely uncertain, say so. If you're making a guess, make that clear. If you don't know something, don't pretend. But when these phrases become automatic, they can weaken your message before you've even delivered it. You start communicating doubt even when you aren't actually doubtful. Imagine someone saying, I think this might possibly be the best option, but I'm not entirely sure. Compare that with, based on what we've seen, this is the best option. The second statement isn't necessarily more intelligent. It's simply more decisive. And people tend to respond to clarity. So become conscious of how you phrase your thoughts. Instead of, I just wanted to ask if maybe you could, to, can you help me with this? Instead of, sorry, can I say something? To, I have a point to add. Instead of, I'm not sure if this is a good idea, but, here's the idea. Instead of, would it maybe be possible for us to, I'd like us to. Notice the difference. You're not becoming rude. You're becoming direct. And directness is one of the clearest forms of confidence. Now, there's another habit you need to eliminate: over-explaining. We've already touched on this when discussing boundaries. But it matters here too. Insecure communication often sounds like a person trying desperately to prevent disagreement. They make a statement, then explain it, then defend it, then provide context, then explain the context, then anticipate objections that nobody has even raised. By the time they're finished, the original point has disappeared. Why does this happen? Because they aren't simply communicating. They're trying to control the listener's reaction. And that's impossible. You cannot control whether someone agrees with you. You can only communicate clearly. So say what you mean. Then stop. Let people respond. You don't need to win every conversation. You don't even need to convince everyone. You simply need to express yourself honestly and respectfully. This is where confidence and emotional maturity meet. A confident person can say, I disagree, without turning it into a personal attack. They can hear, I disagree with you, without hearing, you are worthless. They understand that disagreement is not rejection. It is simply disagreement. And once you stop interpreting every disagreement as a threat, communication becomes much easier. You can have difficult conversations without becoming defensive. You can hear criticism without immediately fighting back. You can admit, you're right, when someone makes a valid point. And that is important, because one of the biggest misunderstandings about confidence is that confident people must always appear certain. They don't. Confident people can say, I don't know. They can say, I was wrong. They can say, I need more information. They can say, let me think about that. Those statements don't weaken authority. In many situations, they strengthen it. But because you're not pretending, you're comfortable enough with yourself to admit what you don't know. Insecure people often protect their image. Confident people protect the truth. That is a major difference. Now let's talk about your voice. Your voice is one of the strongest tools you have. And confidence often sounds less rushed than insecurity. When you're nervous, you may speak quickly. Your sentences become crowded. You swallow words. Your breathing becomes shallow. You may raise your pitch. You may finish statements as though you're asking questions. Again, the solution isn't to force yourself to sound deep or intimidating. It's much simpler. Slow down. Take a breath. Speak clearly. Finish your sentences. Allow pauses. Don't race toward the end of your thought. Imagine that your words have nowhere else to go. You don't need to get them out as quickly as possible. You have time. That mindset alone can change your delivery. Now let's talk about one of the most powerful communication tools you possess. The pause. Most people underestimate it. Someone asks you a difficult question. Instead of answering immediately, pause. 1 second. 2 seconds. Then respond. That tiny pause communicates something powerful. I am comfortable taking my time. You don't have to react to every statement instantly. You don't have to defend yourself immediately. You don't have to answer every challenge with emotion. You can pause. Then choose your words. That is composure. And composure is often more powerful than aggression. Now imagine someone criticizes you. Your idea isn't very good. An insecure response might be, "What? I don't understand what you mean. I actually spent a lot of time on this and everyone else thought it was good." Confident response might be, "What specifically do you think needs improvement?" That's it. Now you've moved the conversation from emotion to information. If their criticism is useful, you can learn. If it's empty, you can dismiss it. But you don't need to defend your identity. Your idea can be criticized without your worth being attacked. That distinction will save you enormous amounts of emotional energy. Now let's talk about disagreement. Confident people don't avoid disagreement. They learn to handle it. You can say, "I see it differently. I don't agree with that conclusion. Here's why I think differently." And then explain your reasoning. Notice the absence of hostility. "You don't need. That's ridiculous. You're completely wrong. How could anyone think that?" Those phrases often reveal emotional insecurity more than confidence. If your position is strong, you don't need to make the other person feel stupid. You can be firm without being disrespectful. That is real authority. Now let's talk about interruptions. Sometimes people will interrupt you. Sometimes intentionally. Sometimes accidentally. If you constantly surrender your sentence whenever someone interrupts, you may unintentionally teach people that your words can be dismissed. You can calmly say, "Let me finish this point." Then continue. No anger. No drama. Just clarity. If someone repeatedly interrupts you, you may need to address it directly. "I'd like to finish my thought, then I'll hear yours." Confidence isn't emotional aggression. It's emotional control. And that leads to another important principle. Never let someone else's emotional intensity force you to match it. Someone raises their voice. You don't have to raise yours. Someone becomes defensive. You don't have to become defensive. Someone becomes insulting. You don't have to become insulting. You can remain calm. In fact, sometimes the calmest person in the conversation has the greatest control. Not because they're manipulating anyone, because they are controlling themselves. And self-control is one of the strongest forms of confidence. Now, let's address something that many people misunderstand. Being confident doesn't mean you should always be the center of attention. You don't need to dominate every conversation. You don't need to tell everyone your achievements. You don't need to constantly prove your intelligence. You don't need to have the final word. Sometimes confidence looks like listening. Really listening. Not planning your response while the other person talks. Not waiting for your opportunity to interrupt. Actually listening. Because a person who is secure in themselves doesn't need to constantly demonstrate their importance. They can allow someone else to speak. They can ask questions. They can learn. They can remain quiet without feeling invisible. That's quiet authority. Now let's create a simple communication framework. Whenever you're speaking in an important situation, remember 4 things. Be clear. Say what you mean. Be concise. Don't bury your point beneath unnecessary explanations. Be calm. Don't let emotional pressure control your delivery. Be respectful. Confidence doesn't require disrespect. These 4 principles will transform the way you communicate. And here's a practical exercise. For the next 7 days, record yourself speaking for 2 minutes every day. Choose a topic. Explain an idea. Tell a story. Give an opinion. Then listen to the recording. Look for, do you speak too quickly? Do you use unnecessary filler words? Do you constantly say, maybe, or I think? Do you apologize unnecessarily? Do your statements sound like questions? Do you rush through the end? Do you over-explain? Don't criticize yourself. Study yourself. You're collecting evidence. And once you identify the patterns, change one at a time. Slow down. Remove one filler phrase. Speak one sentence more directly. Then repeat. You will improve. Now, there's another dimension of speaking with authority that has nothing to do with words. It's whether your actions support what you say. Because imagine someone who constantly says, I'm going to do this, but never follows through. Eventually, their words lose weight. People stop taking them seriously. And more importantly, they stop taking themselves seriously. This connects directly to Chapter 3. Remember? Self-trust is built through evidence. When your actions consistently match your words, you develop integrity. You say you'll show up. You show up. You say you'll finish. You finish. You say no. You maintain the boundary. You say you're going to change. You actually change your behavior. Now your words carry weight. Not because you speak louder. Because people can trust them. That is authority. And it begins internally. So don't obsess over sounding confident. Become someone whose words deserve to be trusted. Then speak clearly. Now think about the most confident person you've ever met. Maybe they weren't the loudest. Maybe they weren't the most charismatic. Maybe they didn't dominate the room. But something about them felt different. They seemed comfortable. They didn't rush. They didn't constantly seek approval. They listened. They spoke when they had something to say. And when they said something, they meant it. That's what you're building. Not a performance. A presence. A way of communicating that says, I know what I think. I'm willing to hear what you think. And I don't need to become defensive simply because we disagree. That is powerful. And there is one final level of communication you need to master. Knowing when not to speak. Sometimes silence is more confident than an argument. Someone wants to provoke you. You don't have to respond. Someone misunderstands you. You don't always need to correct them. Someone wants an explanation you don't owe them. You don't have to provide it. Someone wants to drag you into unnecessary drama. You can walk away. Confidence isn't having the perfect response to everything. Sometimes confidence is realizing, this conversation isn't worth my energy, and leaving. Remember, you don't need to be the loudest person. You need to be clear. You don't need to dominate. You need to remain composed. You don't need to convince everyone. You need to communicate honestly. You don't need to know everything. You need to be comfortable saying when you don't. And you don't need to win every argument. Sometimes the strongest response is simply, I understand your position. I disagree. Then move on. When you reach that level, something changes. You stop using communication to prove your worth. You start using it to express your thoughts. And that is when your voice becomes powerful. But even the most confident communicator will eventually face something that tests every layer of confidence we've built. Failure, rejection, embarrassment, plus a plan that doesn't work, an opportunity that disappears, a goal that takes longer than expected. And when that happens, confidence cannot simply be a feeling. It has to become resilience. Because the real question isn't, can you feel confident when everything is going well? The real question is, who are you when everything goes wrong? That's what we'll discover in Chapter 9. How to become unshakable when you fail. Chapter 9. Become unshakable when you fail. You can learn to speak confidently. You can learn to set boundaries. You can learn to stop comparing yourself to others. You can learn to walk into a room with confidence. But eventually life will test you. You will fail. Someone will reject you. A plan will collapse. An opportunity will disappear. Someone you trusted may disappoint you. A business idea may not work. A relationship may end. You may make a decision that turns out to be wrong. And when that happens, you will discover whether your confidence was real. Because confidence that only exists when everything is going well isn't confidence. It's comfort. Real confidence is revealed when reality refuses to cooperate with you. Think about how different two people can respond to the exact same failure. One person thinks, "This proves I'm not good enough." The other thinks, "That didn't work. What can I learn?" Same event, completely different interpretation. And that interpretation can determine what happens next. Failure itself is painful. But the meaning you attach to failure can make it much more painful. You lose an opportunity. That's an event. Then your mind says, "I'm a failure." That's an interpretation. You get rejected. That's an event. Then your mind says, "Nobody will ever want me." That's an interpretation. You make a mistake. That's an event. Then your mind says, "I'm stupid." That's an interpretation. And suddenly, one event has become an identity. That's where confidence gets destroyed. Because if every mistake becomes evidence that something is wrong with you, eventually you'll become afraid to act. You won't take risks. You won't try new things. You won't ask. You won't create. You won't speak. But because your identity is too fragile, one failure could threaten the entire structure. You need to separate what happened from who you are. You failed. That doesn't mean you are a failure. You made a bad decision. That doesn't mean you are incapable of making good decisions. You were rejected. That doesn't mean you are unworthy. You performed badly. That doesn't mean you are permanently incompetent. You lost money. That doesn't mean you are incapable of rebuilding. This distinction is fundamental. An event is not an identity. And once you understand that, failure becomes something you can work with. Let's change the question. Instead of, "Why did this happen to me?" "What does this teach me?" Instead of, "Why am I so bad at this?" "What skill am I missing?" Instead of, "How could I be so stupid?" "What decision-making process led me here?" Instead of, "What will everyone think?" "What is the next useful action?" Notice how these questions move you from emotion to agency. You aren't pretending that failure doesn't hurt. You're refusing to let pain become paralysis. That is resilience. And resilience is one of the strongest forms of confidence. Because when you know you can recover, you don't have to be terrified of every setback. You can take risks. You can experiment. You can try. You can fail. You can adjust. You can try again. And that gives you a massive advantage over people who need certainty before they act. Now, let's talk about rejection. Rejection can feel deeply personal. Someone doesn't hire you. Someone doesn't want to date you. Someone doesn't accept your proposal. Someone doesn't buy your product. Someone doesn't choose you. The mind immediately asks, "What's wrong with me?" But rejection doesn't always contain that information. Sometimes you simply weren't the right fit. Sometimes the timing was wrong. Sometimes someone else was better suited. Sometimes the other person wanted something different. Sometimes the answer is simply no. And here's something you need to become comfortable with. No is a complete answer. You don't always need to turn it into a psychological investigation of your worth. Of course, you should learn when there is useful feedback. If multiple people reject the same proposal, examine it. If you repeatedly encounter the same problem, investigate it. But don't turn one rejection into a permanent identity. You are allowed to hear no and continue. In fact, confident people often become good at hearing no because they've learned that rejection is survivable. They don't enjoy it. They simply don't fear it as much. And when you stop fearing rejection, your behavior changes. You ask more. You apply more. You negotiate more. You create more. You approach more opportunities. You become more willing to hear the word no because you're no longer treating it like a catastrophe. And eventually, something interesting happens. You hear more yes too. Because you asked more questions. You took more shots. You created more opportunities. This is one of the hidden advantages of resilience. It increases your attempts. And more attempts create more possibilities. Now let's talk about embarrassment. This is another major confidence killer. You say something awkward. You make a mistake in public. You forget someone's name. You trip. You mispronounce something. You give a bad presentation. You make an obvious error. And suddenly your brain tells you, everyone will remember this forever. They won't. Most people are too busy thinking about themselves. And even if someone remembers, so what? Human beings make mistakes. The goal isn't to become someone who never experiences embarrassment. The goal is to become someone who can laugh, learn, and continue. Imagine you make a mistake during a presentation. Instead of panicking, you pause. Let me correct that. Then continue. That's confidence. You don't need to pretend the mistake didn't happen. You simply don't make it bigger than it is. This is another reason confident people can admit mistakes quickly. They understand that trying desperately to hide an obvious mistake often makes the situation worse. Sometimes the strongest sentences, I got that wrong. Let me correct it. No dramatic explanation. No self-attack. Just correction. Then move forward. Now, let's talk about one of the most dangerous responses to failure. Quitting too early. You try something. It doesn't work immediately. You assume the idea is bad. You quit. But maybe the problem wasn't the goal. Maybe the method needed to change. Maybe you needed more practice. Maybe the timing was wrong. Maybe you needed better information. Maybe you simply needed more attempts. This is why resilient people separate strategy failure from identity failure. The strategy failed. Change the strategy. The approach didn't work. Try another approach. The business model failed. The presentation didn't go well. Improve the presentation. The relationship didn't work. Reflect on what happened. You don't need to turn every failed attempt into a verdict about your entire future. Sometimes failure is simply feedback. Painful feedback. Expensive feedback. Embarrassing feedback. But still feedback. And feedback can be used. Now, here's an important warning. Resilience doesn't mean refusing to admit when something is not working. Some people turn never give up into stubbornness. They continue doing the exact same thing indefinitely despite overwhelming evidence that the strategy is wrong. That's not resilience. That's rigidity. Real resilience includes adaptation. You don't have to keep doing the same thing. You have to keep moving toward what matters. Sometimes moving forward means changing direction. Sometimes it means slowing down. Sometimes it means starting over. Sometimes it means walking away. The goal isn't to preserve your original plan. The goal is to preserve your ability to move forward. That distinction is extremely powerful. Now imagine losing something important. A job. A relationship. Money. A business. An opportunity. Your first response may be emotional. That's normal. Allow yourself to feel it. You don't have to become a robot. Confidence doesn't mean suppressing emotion. It means not allowing emotion to make every decision. Give yourself time. Process what happened. Then eventually ask, what now? Those two words can become a powerful mental habit. What now? Not, why me? Not, it's over. Not, I'm finished. But, what now? What can I control? What can I repair? What can I learn? Who can I ask for help? What needs to change? What is the next step? This question restores agency. And agency restores confidence. Because helplessness says, nothing I do matters. Confidence says, something I do next matters. Even if it's small. Even if it's simply getting out of bed. Making the call. Writing the plan. Apologizing. Starting again. Studying. Applying. Trying. One useful action can interrupt an entire cycle of helplessness. Now let's create another practical tool. The recovery framework. Whenever something goes wrong, use 5 questions. Number 1. What happened? Describe the event without exaggeration. Facts, not stories. Number 2. What was within my control? Take responsibility for your part. Don't take responsibility for everything. Number 3. What can I learn? Identify the lesson. Number 4. What will I change? Turn the lesson into a specific adjustment. Number 5. What is the next action? Do something, even something small. This framework prevents you from getting trapped inside emotional analysis. You acknowledge the event. You extract the lesson. Then you move. Now, there's another side of resilience that we need to discuss. Self-talk. Pay attention to what you say to yourself after failure. Because sometimes the external failure isn't what destroys confidence. It's what you say afterward. I'm such an idiot. I always ruin everything. I knew I couldn't do it. Nobody respects me. I'm never going to succeed. These statements feel emotional. But repeated often enough, they become beliefs. So change the language. Instead of, I always fail, to, this attempt failed. Instead of, I'm terrible at this, to, I'm not good at this yet. Instead of, I can't handle this, to, this is difficult, but I can take the next step. Instead of, everything is ruined, to, something went wrong. Let's determine what can still be done. This isn't fake positivity. It's accurate thinking. You're refusing to exaggerate one event into a permanent conclusion. And accurate thinking is a major component of confidence. Now, I want you to remember something from Chapter 3. Your confidence is built from evidence. Failure doesn't necessarily destroy that evidence. In fact, sometimes failure creates some of the strongest evidence you'll ever have. You tried something difficult. It didn't work. And you're still here. You survived. You learned. You adapted. You continued. That is evidence. You lost something. You rebuilt. Evidence. You were rejected. You tried again. Evidence. You made a mistake. You corrected it. Evidence. You thought you couldn't handle something. You did. Evidence. Eventually, you develop a different relationship with uncertainty. You stop thinking, what if everything goes wrong? And start thinking, if something goes wrong, I'll deal with it. That is a powerful place to live. Because life will always contain uncertainty. You cannot eliminate it. You cannot guarantee success. You cannot guarantee that people will stay. You cannot guarantee that every decision will be correct. You cannot guarantee that every opportunity will work out. But you can build yourself into someone who can respond. That's the ultimate goal. Not an invincible life. An adaptable person. Someone who bends without breaking. Someone who can take a hit without losing their identity. Someone who can experience failure without becoming failure. Someone who can experience rejection without becoming rejection. Someone who can experience loss without losing themselves. That person is difficult to destroy. And that is what dangerously confident really means. Not that nothing can hurt you. But that pain doesn't get to decide who you become. So here's your challenge. Think of the biggest failure or rejection you've experienced. Don't romanticize it. Don't minimize it. Write it down. Then answer 5 questions. What actually happened? What was my responsibility? What did I learn? What would I do differently? What can I do now? Then stop reliving it. You've extracted the lesson. Use it. Because one of the most confident things you can do is stop punishing yourself for a lesson you've already learned. You don't have to carry an old failure forever just to prove that you remember it. Learn. Adjust. And if you fail again, do the same thing. Learn. Adjust. That's how resilience is built. One recovery at a time. Eventually, you reach a point where failure no longer feels like the end of the world. It becomes part of the process. You still want success. You still care. You still feel disappointment. But underneath it all is a quiet belief. I will figure this out. That belief is priceless. Because when you believe you can recover, you become willing to attempt more. And when you're willing to attempt more, you create more opportunities. And when you create more opportunities, you increase the probability of success. That's why resilience isn't merely emotional strength. It is a practical advantage. It gives you permission to play a bigger game. So don't build a life designed to protect you from failure. Build yourself into someone who can handle it. Don't build a personality that needs everything to go perfectly. Build a mind that can adapt when it doesn't. And don't measure your confidence by how you feel when life is easy. Measure it by what you do when life becomes difficult. Because the strongest version of you isn't created during your easiest days. It's created when you are disappointed, uncertain, rejected, exhausted, and tempted to quit. And you decide, I'm not finished. That sentence may be one of the most powerful sentences you ever learn. I'm not finished. Not because you know exactly what comes next. Not because you're guaranteed to succeed. But because you trust yourself to keep searching for the next move. And when you reach that level of self-trust, something changes. You stop needing to prove yourself to everyone. You stop needing to win every argument. You stop needing constant validation. You stop needing to appear perfect. You become calmer, quieter, more secure. And that is where this journey ultimately leads. Not toward becoming someone who walks into every room demanding attention, but toward becoming someone who no longer needs to prove that they belong there. Someone who knows who they are. Someone who trusts themselves. Someone who can handle discomfort. Someone who can say no. Someone who doesn't live by comparison. Someone who speaks clearly. Someone who can fail and recover. Someone who doesn't need the world to constantly reassure them that they're worthy. That is the final level. And in the last chapter, we're going to bring everything together. Because the ultimate form of confidence isn't becoming someone you have to constantly prove to the world. It's becoming the person you no longer need to prove. That's chapter 10. And that's where your transformation becomes an identity. Chapter 10. Become the person you no longer need to prove. There comes a point in your journey when confidence stops being something you practice. It becomes something you embody. You no longer have to remind yourself to stand tall. You no longer have to rehearse every sentence before speaking. You no longer need to convince yourself that you're capable. You simply begin operating differently. Not because you became perfect. Not because you eliminated fear. Not because everyone suddenly started respecting you. But because you finally built a relationship with yourself that doesn't depend on constant approval. That is the deepest form of confidence. And this is where everything we've discussed comes together. You learned that confidence begins with self-trust. You learned that your actions create evidence. You learned to stop waiting until you feel ready. You learned to become comfortable with discomfort. You learned how to say no. You learned to stop comparing your life to everyone else's. You learned how to communicate with clarity. You learned how to recover when you fail. Now you need to turn those lessons into a way of living. Because information doesn't transform you. Application does. You can listen to this entire audiobook and feel inspired. You can write down every principle. You can agree with every idea. But if your behavior doesn't change, nothing changes. Confidence is not something you understand. It is something you demonstrate every day through your choices. Let's begin with the most important choice. Keep your promises to yourself. Remember the foundation. Self-trust. When you tell yourself you'll do something, try to do it. If you say you're going to wake up at a certain time, wake up. If you say you're going to exercise, exercise. If you say you're going to finish the project, finish it. If you say you're going to stop contacting someone, stop. If you say you're going to learn a skill, learn it. You don't need to make enormous promises. In fact, start small. Promise yourself something you can realistically accomplish. Then accomplish it. Because every completed promise creates evidence. And evidence builds self-trust. This is how confidence becomes real. Not through affirmations alone. Through proof. You become the person who does what they said they would do. And once you trust yourself, your decisions become easier. You don't need 10 people to approve them. You don't need endless reassurance. You can listen to advice. You can consider criticism. You can ask questions. But ultimately, you can make your own decision. That is independence. Now, let's revisit fear. Fear isn't going anywhere. Don't waste your life trying to eliminate it. Instead, change your relationship with it. When fear appears, ask, "What is this trying to tell me?" Maybe it is warning you about genuine danger. Listen. Maybe it's telling you that you're about to do something unfamiliar. Continue. Maybe it's reminding you that the outcome matters. Prepare. Maybe it's simply discomfort. The goal isn't to become fearless. The goal is to become fear-capable. Someone who can feel fear without automatically surrendering to it. That is much more realistic. And much more powerful. Now remember discomfort. You need it. A life designed around comfort will eventually become a life designed around limitation. So continue challenging yourself. Have the difficult conversation. Take the opportunity. Speak in the meeting. Ask for what you want. Learn the skill. Start the project. Go where you're inexperienced. Do the thing you've been postponing. Not because discomfort is inherently good, but because growth requires resistance. You don't need to live in constant discomfort. You simply need to stop treating discomfort as an emergency. Let it exist. Breathe. Continue. Now let's talk about boundaries. Your confidence will always be tested by other people's expectations. People will ask things from you. Some requests will be reasonable. Some won't. You need to know the difference. Say yes when you genuinely want to. Say no when you need to. And don't confuse guilt with wrongdoing. Sometimes you will feel guilty because you're doing something new. That's okay. You can feel guilty and still keep your boundary. You can disappoint someone and still be a good person. You can be kind without being controlled. You can be generous without being available to everyone. And remember, your life is not a public resource. People don't automatically deserve access to your time, attention, money, energy, or emotional space simply because they ask. You choose. That's confidence. Now let's revisit comparison. There will always be someone ahead. Accept that. Someone will have more money. Someone will be more attractive. Someone will be more successful. Someone will have more followers. Someone will have a bigger house. Someone will have a better opportunity. And that's fine. Their life doesn't cancel yours. Instead of asking, "Am I ahead of them? Am I becoming better than I was?" Build your own scoreboard. Measure your discipline, your health, your relationships, your skills, your financial progress, your emotional control, your courage, your integrity, your consistency. Those are the measurements that matter, because the person you need to beat is the person you were yesterday. And even that isn't about hatred. You're not fighting yourself. You're developing yourself. That's an important distinction. You don't need to despise your current identity to create a better one. You can respect where you are while refusing to stay there. Now communication. Speak clearly. Don't apologize for existing. Don't shrink your opinions to make everyone comfortable. Don't turn every statement into a question. Don't over-explain. Don't rush. Listen. Then speak. And remember that confidence isn't volume. You can speak quietly and still command attention. You can be gentle and still be firm. You can disagree without being disrespectful. You can admit that you're wrong without losing authority. You can say, I don't know, and then learn. You can say, I was wrong, and then correct yourself. You can say, I disagree, and remain calm. That is mature confidence. Now failure. You will fail again. This audiobook cannot protect you from that. No book can. No strategy can. No amount of confidence can guarantee success. But confidence can change what failure means. Instead of, I'm finished, you learn to say, what now? Instead of, I'm a failure, you say, that attempt failed. Instead of, I can't do this, you say, I haven't figured it out yet. You learn. You adapt. You recover. You continue. And eventually, you build something incredibly valuable. Trust in your ability to recover. That's when confidence becomes difficult to destroy. Because you no longer believe, nothing bad will happen to me. You believe, if something bad happens, I'll deal with it. That's stronger. Much stronger. Now let's talk about identity. Your identity is shaped by repeated behavior. If you repeatedly avoid difficult conversations, you become someone who avoids difficult conversations. If you repeatedly keep your promises, you become someone who keeps promises. If you repeatedly act despite fear, you become courageous. If you repeatedly protect your boundaries, you become someone who respects themselves. If you repeatedly recover from failure, you become resilient. You don't have to announce who you're becoming. Your behavior will announce it for you. This is why you shouldn't obsess over saying, I am confident. Ask instead, what would a confident person do next? Then do that. That's the question. What would the confident version of me do? Would they send the message? Would they make the call? Would they ask? Would they say no? Would they walk away? Would they apologize? Would they try again? Would they speak up? Would they stop comparing? Would they take responsibility? Would they keep their promise? The next, one decision at a time. You don't become confident in one dramatic moment. You become confident through thousands of small decisions. And eventually, those decisions become automatic. That's when confidence becomes identity. Now I want you to understand something. Being dangerously confident doesn't mean becoming arrogant. Arrogance says, I am better than you. Confidence says, I don't need to be better than you to know my value. Arrogance needs an audience. Confidence doesn't. Arrogance needs comparison. Confidence doesn't. Arrogance needs superiority. Confidence needs self-respect. So don't become arrogant. Become grounded. Know your strengths. Know your weaknesses. Know what you're capable of. Know what you still need to learn. Take responsibility. Stay curious. Treat people with respect. And don't shrink yourself simply to make other people comfortable. That's the balance. Strong without being cruel. Assertive without being aggressive. Ambitious without being desperate. Confident without being arrogant. Kind without being weak. Independent without being isolated. That's the goal. Now, let's create your daily confidence system. Every morning, ask yourself 3 questions. What matters most today? What am I avoiding? What would the strongest version of me do? Then choose one meaningful action. Not 10. Do that action. At the end of the day, ask, did I keep my word today? Did I face discomfort? Did I respect my boundaries? Did I act according to my values? What did I learn? Then go to sleep. Wake up. Repeat. That's how transformation happens. Not through one motivational speech. Through repetition. Day after day. Week after week. Month after month. Until the behavior becomes part of you. And eventually you will notice something. The things that once required enormous courage become normal. Speaking up becomes normal. Saying no becomes normal. Making decisions becomes normal. Taking risks becomes normal. Handling rejection becomes normal. Being alone becomes normal. Trying again becomes normal. You won't necessarily feel fearless. You'll simply become less controlled by fear. And that is the point. You are not trying to become a person who never doubts themselves. You're becoming someone who doesn't allow doubt to make every decision. You are not trying to become someone who never experiences rejection. You're becoming someone who doesn't interpret rejection as a verdict. You are not trying to become someone who never fails. You're becoming someone who knows how to recover. You are not trying to become someone everyone likes. You're becoming someone you respect. And that final distinction may be the most important lesson of this entire audiobook. Stop trying to become impressive to everyone else. Become trustworthy to yourself. Become someone you can rely on. Someone who does what they say. Someone who walks away when necessary. Someone who speaks honestly. Someone who takes responsibility. Someone who keeps learning. Someone who doesn't abandon themselves whenever someone disapproves. Someone who can stand alone without feeling worthless. Someone who can stand among powerful people without shrinking. Someone who can stand among successful people without feeling inferior. Someone who can stand among strangers without needing their approval. Someone who can look in the mirror and say, I respect the person I'm becoming. That is the destination. Not perfection. Not superiority. Not invulnerability. Self-respect. And once you have that, confidence becomes much easier. Because you're no longer asking the world, am I enough? You're answering the question through your actions every day. Now, before we finish, remember the 10 principles. 1. Build self-trust. Keep promises to yourself. 2. Stop waiting to feel ready. Action creates confidence. 3. Become your own evidence. Prove your capabilities through behavior. 4. Control your emotional reactions. Pause before you respond. 5. Become comfortable with discomfort. Growth requires resistance. 6. Learn to say no. Protect your time and your boundaries. 7. Stop comparing. Build your own scoreboard. 8. Speak with authority. Be clear, calm, and direct. 9. Become resilient. Failure is information, not identity. 10. Become the person you no longer need to prove. Let your actions speak. Now take a moment. Think about the person you were when this journey began. Maybe you were constantly seeking approval. Maybe you doubted yourself. Maybe you avoided difficult situations. Maybe you were afraid of rejection. Maybe you compared yourself to everyone. Maybe you said yes when you wanted to say no. Maybe you kept waiting for confidence to arrive before taking action. But now you know something different. Confidence isn't something you wait for. It's something you build. One uncomfortable decision. One honest conversation. One kept promise. One boundary. One risk. One failure. One recovery. One day at a time. So when this audiobook ends, don't simply feel inspired. Do something. Make the call. Send the message. Start the project. Set the boundary. Say no. Say yes. Speak up. Take the opportunity. Walk away. Try again. Whatever you've been postponing, take one step. Because confidence doesn't grow while you are thinking about becoming confident. It grows when you act. And if you remember nothing else from this audiobook, remember this. You don't need to feel confident to act confidently. At first, let the evidence follow. Let the evidence become self-trust. Let self-trust become confidence. Let confidence become identity. And let that identity become the foundation for the life you're building. You don't need everyone to believe in you. You need to stop abandoning yourself. You don't need everyone to approve of you. You need to respect your own decisions. You don't need to eliminate fear. You need to stop allowing fear to control your future. You don't need to become the most powerful person in the room. You need to become comfortable being yourself in the room. And you don't need to prove that you're valuable. You need to live in a way that proves it to you. So walk forward, quietly, deliberately, with your shoulders back, your mind clear, your boundaries strong, your words measured, your actions consistent, your standards high, your ego under control, your fear acknowledged, but not obeyed. Because the most confident person isn't necessarily the person who enters the room and demands attention. Sometimes it's the person who enters the room, knows exactly who they are, and realizes they have nothing to prove. That is the kind of confidence that cannot easily be taken from you. That is the confidence you build from within. And that is how you become dangerously confident.